Hello and welcome. My name is Jessica Pierce. I am a senior site manager here at the National Council of Juvenile and Family Court Judges. And today we are going to talk about normalizing adolescence in juvenile drug treatment courts. And so this presentation is going to be a little bit of adolescent development, but then a lot more about how the juvenile drug court team can help support youth in having typical adolescent milestones, right? You can help them achieve those kinds of things that we all did in our adolescence to help us grow and develop as people, and how sometimes when we have kids in the system, they don't always get a chance to do that. And so you can think about this not just for our drug court kids, although I think we have a lot more kind of control and contact with kids, but any kids in the system, including kids that are just on regular probation, kids that are in foster care. These are normal activities that kids sometimes miss out on because of their system involvement. And we want you to think about what you're already doing to help make sure that doesn't happen and what else you can do to change that up. Today, I am joined by some wonderful esteemed faculty, and I'm going to call on each of them and ask them to introduce themselves and tell you a little bit about what they do. So Martha Blomquist, I'm going to call on you first.
Thanks, Jess. Hi, everybody. I'm Martha Blomquist. I'm a senior site manager with the National Council of Juvenile and Family Court Judges, and I've been working with Jessica and a colleague who will introduce himself shortly, Elisha, and a practitioner colleague, Lindsay, for a number of years. And I've had the pleasure of probably working with many of you and having you be participants in other webinars where I've had a chance to share what I know and learn from you as well. So I'm delighted to be part of today's webinar and the panel with my other colleagues.
Thank you, Martha. And Elisha, why don't you introduce yourself?
Hello, my name is Elisha Harris. I'm a site manager with the National Council. Prior to this, my focus was mostly in community-based programming, either in school or behavior modifications and interventions in the community. So I'm really excited about this presentation, and I'm looking forward to some of this discussion.
Thank you, Elisha. And last but certainly not least, Lindsay, tell everyone about yourself.
My name is Lindsay Jones, and I'm a program manager for a juvenile drug treatment court in Albuquerque, New Mexico. And I've been working in the juvenile justice field for about 15 years, starting as a probation officer and someone that would refer to juvenile drug treatment courts, and then becoming a member of the team, and then now the program manager. So I'm excited to talk about this topic with you guys and brainstorm some great ideas.
Thank you, Lindsay. And as we like to do here at the National Council, we will be doing a lot of interactive work today. So all of you will get an opportunity to share your thoughts and your approaches to working with young people. So keep that in the back of your mind as we go along about what you might like to add to the conversation. Of course, I should let you know that we are federally funded. So you should know that everything we're going to talk about today are our points of view and do not represent any official position of either the Office of Juvenile Justice and Delinquency Prevention, who is funding this webinar, or the parent organization of all of us, the National Council of Juvenile and Family Court Judges, or our partner organization, the National Association of Drug Court Professionals. Whew. So that's the disclaimer for today. All right, so as I said, we want to talk about these typical adolescent rites of passage, and we want to identify strategies that you can do in your program to help youth meet those milestones. And then I want to talk a lot about those challenges that sometimes young people face because their system involved, and what all of you can do and are doing to break down those barriers, to make sure that the young people who, even though they're involved in the system, are still having all of those experiences that help them build the skills that they need to become those productive adults that we want them to be when they get out into the world. All right, so Martha, I'm going to turn it over to you to talk to us a little bit about adolescence.
Thank you. And just to piggyback on kind of what Jessica has already said, we certainly have shared information both in the Juvenile Drug Treatment Court guidelines and when we work with teams about the significance of the fact that the population that we're working with as participants in juvenile drug treatment courts they're adolescents, and we know so much from the brain science and social science and social emotional learning about what that means. It means, you know, these are young people that are in between being children and the characteristics of children and full-fledged adults. And so we talked a lot about how to take the characteristics out of adolescence and use that as a lens to understand why are they doing the crazy things they do and the scary things, and their impulsiveness and their gravitation towards pleasure and excitement, and their limited critical thinking skills and their limited ability to anticipate consequences, the fact that they're very self-absorbed, they're very emotional. We've talked a lot about all of these characteristics of adolescence to bring a lens to your work and understanding why you have to do some of the work that you need to do with youth to help them with decision making, to help them with self-regulation and self-control and reflection and empathy and so forth. But with this webinar, I'm thinking we're taking a slightly different angle, and that is to really ground you in like the things that are totally adolescent that we want kids to experience. Not that when we say, oh God, can we just get them past this period? Our message today is no. Well, at the same time that there are some things that we need to help them to get past, there are some things that we want to make sure they actually experience, and that they get to be like their peers who aren't in juvenile drug treatment court, who are the kids down the street, who are the kids working at the Starbucks, or just out having fun on a Friday evening somewhere in the community. We want to help teams think about how your kids need to be part of that action as well. And so just a reminder about what's going on with kids. Externally, we can pick up a lot of things, but internally, we may need some reminders of what's going on because kids can't necessarily articulate what's going on or what they need. But these are things that we as professionals and adults need to be aware of. And so, for example, during adolescence, youth need to have certain experiences so they can move through adolescence and then be prepared for adulthood. And one of the really key things that is happening with us, this is a time in our lives where we're really trying to identify ourselves and discover who kind of we are as authentic, distinct individuals. And so that comes out how we're defining ourselves. It can have a physical manifestation, how we dress, how we wear our hair, how we walk, how we carry ourselves, and then our own messages inside our heads of how we see ourselves. So we want to give youth experiences to help them discover who they are and their uniqueness and feeling comfortable. And we know with adolescents, there's so much comparing going on and like looking at others and using others as a framework. But that's part of the process of us trying to figure out who we are. And that happens oftentimes in relation to others. And so an important messaging for that during adolescence is that youth need to get the messages from adults and their peers about their worthiness as a unique individual. So praise, recognition, acknowledgement. Oh, you're good at this. Oh, wow, try this. That sort of thing. And that part of the messaging, the external messaging, and how they take it in internally then helps them work on, again, who they are and kind of how they're putting together their own story as they say it, not what the parents say, not what the school teachers say, not what the neighbors say, not what the family members say, but what they say about who they are and who they want to become. And this is also a time really important for all of us working with youth in the court context when they get to really sift through, conflicting messages and identify and commit to values, the values that they're going to use as they live their life through adolescence, but then into adulthood. And of course, we want to hook them into the values that we have about caring for other people, respecting property, working hard, being conscientious, caring about others, wanting to contribute to their community and those kinds of values. But this is a time when they're exploring what the values are and what ones that they feel like they can commit to care about as well. So that's part of adolescence. And then in addition to that, there's a whole lot of exploration that goes on, trying things on, looking at, again, how they present themselves in society, getting body piercings, nose, eyebrows, ears, what are they going to look like? How do they want to present themselves to the world, and exploring things. And then also having the experience and the messaging of they can be responsible. They may not be acting responsibly on a regular basis, but they have the potential to be responsible. And they can make choices, follow through, and make things happen in their lives. And I think that's really important, that individuals have a sense of agency. And some of the youth who come to us have very challenging environments, and they may have real issues around hope and looking towards the future that is appealing to them. And we need to make sure that this is a time when they're with us, and in adolescence in general, where they do feel like they can have meaningful relationships and opportunities, and life can be good for them. And not to say that it's going to be easy, but they can do life, they can make things happen, they can achieve things, they can recover and pick themselves up from difficult times and mistakes and what have you. And then this is also a time when relationships are important. I mean, when we think about going through adolescence in our teen years and early adults, important time for relationships with our peers that are just friends, not just, but friends, and also who we have attractions to, relationships that, we experience love and a sense of belonging. Young people need to have those. And have the feeling that they can be in relationships, that relationships can be safe, and they can navigate them and be viewed as a partner and a friend. And then finally, and really important, we need to give youth experiences during adolescence where they do feel they belong, and they're not outsiders, and they're not marginalized, and they're not on the fringes of everybody else, but they really are right in the middle of the community and their school and their family and their neighborhood and their peers. So those, I would just say that's what the positive stuff about adolescence that we want to keep in mind. And then as we think towards, what does that mean? What are the key things that happen during adolescence that we want to make sure our kids have the experiences that other kids have? So that's where we get to the idea about what are adolescent milestones or rites of passage or coming of age experiences that we want our kids in juvenile drug treatment court to have, just like kids anywhere have. And so I guess that's where we have our first question. Slido for all of you is, when you think about rites of passage in the United States for young people, adolescents, or milestones or coming of age, what comes to your mind?
All right, so to do Slido, if you haven't done that with us before, you can use your smartphone to take a picture of that QR code up there, and you'd be able to type your answers in on the smartphone. If you want to, you can go to slido.com. So either way, whenever you get to Slido, and you can go to slido.com either on your phone, or if you want to, you can go to slido.com, you can open up another window. And then you're going to enter in the code 776-294, and that'll let you answer a question. And I see we have one answer that's already come in, which is travel. So being able to travel as a young person is one of those rites of passage. Going on a school trip. I don't know about all of you, but being able to go with classmates and peers on a trip for sports or for drama was a really big part of my adolescent development.
Prom, I like that.
That's one of those classics, right? Like every 80s movie about adolescence revolves around prom. What other things come to mind for folks?
Relationship building, the first significant other, or that first really tight group of friends, yes, that can last a whole lifetime, actually, for some people.
Yeah, those people that are your kind of ride or die. We see license. Yeah, getting your driver's license is such a huge thing for kids.
And coping with the, maybe the heartbreak or the loss of when your friends change, if they move, if somebody needs to move, you're in high school and you're really close, your neighbor moves or somebody that otherwise, that's really can be quite traumatic when your friends change.
And I think a lot of it too is about, like, sometimes your friend groups really do sort of, especially you think about those early days of adolescence, your freshman and sophomore years, where you kind of, maybe you're moving between groups, maybe you're moving from being one type of kid into being another kind of kid. And you get entirely different friends by the time you're graduating.
And then that moving homes or towns, the decisions that the adults make about their family lives, and then the teens in the family have to go along with that. And some families, I think about military families, and that moving all the time and having to make new friends and saying goodbye to other friends. That can be that those can be kind of rites of passage, and feeling like kids can pick up or not, pick up where they left off and feel confident that they can make new friends in a new place because they're likable and because they know how to start a conversation, and they know how to ask questions that make somebody else interested in them.
Applying for jobs is another big one too. The very first time that you had to seek out employment as an adolescent, I know for me there were a million moving pieces. What do I do? How do I do this? What are these questions on this form? Even from how you dress or present yourself for an interview, all of those kind of things. That's a big milestone.
Yeah, being able to do an interview at all. My daughter is 16 right now, and she wants to get a job, and she's terrified of that process of talking to somebody about it.
Considering about the future, careers in college, that, your junior and senior year, when it becomes time to start applying, looking at schools and deciding what you're going to do, that can be a lot. You have to think about a lot of things. It teaches you kind of to start looking at your value system and planning for the long term, which is scary sometimes, especially if you're 16, 17, 18. Now all of a sudden you've got to think about, what do I want to do in 5 years? What is the course of that? And that's, a long time away for someone who's, in their late teens. So.
And the financing of it all. And also, I think about how important, if kids are really embedded in their schools and they feel like they're succeeding, they're likely to have a school counselor that they turn to, say, well, what kind of school would I be, should I be looking at? And getting that school counselor's guidance. And then that sense of the school counselor saying, I know what you're good at, and I think this program or this college would be really great for you. And if a youth doesn't have that relationship with someone at school, what a loss, because then they don't get that kind of guidance and that affirmation of, you can do this, it's scary, but I see that you've got some great things going for you while you've been at this school, and I just see that you might like this small town environment, or you might like this big urban college, or here are things about applying for scholarships, so getting all of that support and information, hand-holding for your planning your future.
Well, this is one of those times when we think about brain development and what kids are doing, they're moving away from kind of the magical thinking of childhood. So, when you ask a 3-year-old what they want to be when they grow up, they'll say something like a lion or an astronaut, right? And when you ask like a 16-year-old, I think you see a little bit more of that panic look of, oh my gosh, I can't be a lion, and I don't think astronaut's going to work out. So now what is there available to me? What is a practical thing to do? And without that guidance and support from the adults around them, it can feel basically completely unknowable, right?
Another thing that came to mind when I was looking at this was like the freedom of expression. And I don't know if this is the truth for everybody else, but like, I know growing up, like my sisters definitely went through a phase where I felt like they were dyeing their hair all the time, or making different choices with the way that they wanted to present themselves to the world. And luckily we had the space to do that. But that is kind of part of the whole finding your way and seeing it, who you are and how you want to express that, from the way that you dressed and all those kind of things. And that's a really big part. And sometimes we forget about that, sometimes you dye your hair purple and in 10 years you look back and you're like, I don't know what I was going through. Or you can rationalize, I was really going through something at this time.
Right. So then, if you have the if you have the kind of the documentation of your teen years, like in high school photos or whatnot, and but that's really important. And I think as much as we might go, oh my God, as we get older, all of having that experience is so important and so cementing. Again, to have the freedom to be that however you present how you want to present yourself. So this is kind of just a collage of what adolescence milestones in the United States culture seems to cover, with what many of you have mentioned about driver's license, a graduation, Elisha with the comment about the hair, maybe with the makeup and so forth, dating, significant cultural events that kids are part of, powwows, with the tribal culture, even the summer activities that kids like to do. We were talking earlier at the panel about county fairs in the summertime, and that's often a fun thing that teenagers like to do on a regular, that's a part of adolescent milestone. The significant big date or the prom date or going to concerts, and the first job, prom, all of those things that we were just talking about. It seems like that's kind of that's the full range, and it strikes me as just being so vibrant, right? What we're talking about, and so full of excitement and promise, and then also emotion. That many of these things that we're talking about internally, kids, we all carry a certain emotion or value or feeling associated with some of these milestones.
All right, so let's talk a little bit more about why these milestones are so important then. And Elisha, I know you still right now work with kids, and so you're kind of our voice for them today. So tell me a little bit about why it's important.
So one of the big reasons that this is so important is because we know environments are kind of the key influence on what a youth development looks like. A lot of their individual goals, and in fact, most of their individual goals when they're in their adolescence, are influenced by socializing agents and their places. So socialization dictates what's the norm for them, and pressures that that people in general face, but that kind of also influence is more prevalent amongst youth. So when we think about things like their daily goals, their choices, their behaviors, their socialization groups, and the ebbs and flows of who they are most in contact with have a huge part in whether or not what substitutes for them as normal, quote unquote. And so we know that normal looks a little bit different no matter who it is. And so that individuality creates some limitations when we decide what is normal, because a lot of the times we just listed off a number of different activities that we constitute as normal behavior and normal adolescent milestones. And that's not true for everyone, especially if they live in a culture or a group that doesn't adhere to those kind of things. And so when we make programs, we have to be aware of that when we are dictating to them the trajectory of what they're doing. You can go ahead and go to the next slide. So we know that primarily for youth, their family group is their first social group. And so, parents represent important role models for the development of pro-social behavior. But then as adolescents continue to develop more agency, this socialization process goes from being unidirectional, like parent to child, and more bi-directional when we're thinking about mutually beneficial processes characterized by discussion and negotiation of beliefs, attitudes, and practices. Everyone knows that once a kid moves into their adolescence, they get really good at negotiating what it is they want, arguing for why they feel like they should have X, Y, and Z and not this, or, how they were treated unfairly. They become really good at that because they're moving to a point now where their thought process is starting to be turned in on themselves with more of like, what do I want? What is it that I need, and when they're seeking things out. And so positive peer modeling and awareness, we know, have been found to give like protective factors against violence, substance misuse, and unhealthy sexual risk factors. In contrast, social isolation, peer rejection, and bullying are associated with like adverse health outcomes such as increased delinquency, depressions in there, suicidal ideations, low self-esteem. And so it's really important that they have the time to not only explore different peer groups and develop those on their own, but kind of understand how to set aside their individuality at one point from their group and break apart from that group think process. So in the survey that you're looking at now, this is a My Voice survey. And so adolescents were asked about something or someone that helps them live their best life. And so I like to think of live your best life as almost like this generation's battle cry. And a few years ago, it was YOLO, where it was like, you only live once. And it was kind of their moniker for, I'm gonna do whatever it is makes me happy, all the things that bring me joy. And it was also an excuse just for their rash behavior, which we know, adolescents, their brains are not fully developed at that point, up until the point where we're 25, our frontal lobe is still under development. And so a lot of things are just done by impulse. And live your best life is the same exact concept as YOLO, because you'll often hear them yell that when they make a very rash decision, or when you ask them why they did that, they're like, oh, I was living my best life. And so if you look at this, what you can see is that the top categories when they were asked who or what helps you live your best life were family, friends and coworkers, significant others and romantic partners, extracurricular activities and hobbies, and then support inspiration from others. Those first two groups, like I said, we know that the family and the parents are primarily that first pro-social group. But as we get older and we move into that adolescent area, that friends and coworkers, that group that you spend the most time with, all of a sudden reaches, and that shifts. And so, and then even things like their hobbies and what they're doing, which they now again have some choice in, starts to help them to decide what it is they want to do and who they are as a person. And these were the top 10 answers from 913 responses that are shown here. And then you can go ahead and next. So adolescents face variations in access to opportunities and supports that are often related to a myriad of things, whether it be race, socioeconomic status, sex, gender, expression, differing abilities. And the physical and social environments include parents, family, peers, schools, neighborhoods, media, and social media. We know that's a big one. Have a major influence on their developmental and well-being. When we think about development of programs for JDTCs, or for youth in JDTCs, it's key that we look beyond kind of what that streamlined process is of, we just want to get them to stop using substances. We want to make sure that they adhere to all of these rules that we've listed for them. And a big reason for that is because by the time a youth has come into the JDTC, they've already kind of been self-governing. They have had a lot more freedom. They've had a lot more adult responsibility. Oftentimes, they're the one that is often getting their siblings ready for school, making sure they get to school. They're managing the house at home. Depending on what their circumstances are, they might be more involved in the finances or just like the day-to-day activities if they happen to be the translator, or if, a parent is working overnight and sleeping, whatever the issue is. And so when they come into a program and all choice is taken away from them, and they have very little dictation in what they are doing, now all of a sudden they're thrust into a situation that is completely out of the norm for them, where they've gone from having all this autonomy to having very little autonomy whatsoever. And now everything is being dictated to them. And that can lead to a lot of resistance when it comes to programs. I know that working with teens, one of the key lessons that I had to learn is to not engage in arguments with them, which is really, really hard, because teens know everything, or they have a reasoning for everything that they do, or why things should be done a certain way. And sometimes it's hard to communicate with them around that. And so one of the things that I found beneficial throughout my career is to kind of give them the respect of, like, I understand that you are doing a lot of adult things, or you've had a lot of adult responsibilities thrust upon you, and then talking to them the same way that I would an adult, because essentially that is what they are in practice, not necessarily where they're at age-wise or developmental-wise, but in practice, they've had to shoulder a lot of that. And there's somewhat a badge of honor that they wear because they've had to go through all this and do all this for themselves, that they are resistant to you snatching that away from them. So in communicating with them about programs, or how we're going to navigate this, or how we can set a goal and work towards something, it's always been a communication of, like, okay, well, what is it that you want to do, or how can we get you to this end goal, and helping them break that down. And then also using what their experience is to help them understand that they have the skills to be responsible or to navigate a different process, and help allowing them to relate it to things that they've done in the past, their time management. Okay, well, if you could get up, get your sister ready for school, get them to school on time and things like that, let's look at and translate some of that time management skill into working through the program and the goals and objectives that you have here, because it's the same thing. A lot of the things that we learn in our adolescence, all we do when we get older is synthesize that experience to adapt it to our adult lives. And so when we allow them to engage in those pro-social activities, as even if they're not inside of what we call the normative setting, we're still giving them a chance to develop those skills and carry them on with them, so that when they graduate from their program, which is what we want, that they still have that tool set to be able to go forth and do what it is that they need to do.
So I'm really struck by that idea of self-determinance and autonomy, which is such a big part of what adolescence is, and why some of these sort of milestone activities are so important for kids, is that idea that it helps build that self-determinance, helps build that kind of picture of who they are as a person. So Lindsay, I wanted you to talk a little bit about why drug courts should care about this. So we know why it's important to kids, but why is it important to programs?
Yeah, absolutely. Thanks, Jessica. So I think why juvenile drug treatment court programs should pay attention to these things and to care about these things really goes back to, what are our mission statements, right? Like what are we, when you look at your mission statement as a juvenile drug treatment court, what are you trying to accomplish with these kids? And I think once we break it down into the sections of what we're trying to help them with, a lot of these pro-social activities align with what we're really looking at. So I pulled up our mission statement for my program, and some of the things that we have listed is strengthening family relationships, right? That falls into a lot of what we just talked about and as Elijah talked about, those two main important things in their lives are their family and their friends, right? And so making sure that we're strengthening those relationships through these pro-social activities, through these opportunities for them to do those things in the community. Another thing is promoting positive community ties. How can they have positive community ties if we don't let them out in the community, if we don't let them engage in these activities, if we don't connect them with those things, right? Encouraging a commitment to education. Well, we've got to get them out there and show them how to fill out that application for their financial aid. Those milestones of waiting for that acceptance letter, whether it be to a trade school or to a training or a college, helping them get involved in those. What does that education look like for them, and how do we walk them through that process? promoting public safety, right? One of the ways that we can promote public safety is to help them be a part of their community. They're going to be less likely to victimize their own community that they have a stake in. If they've planted that tree at that park, they're going to be less likely to vandalize it and to pull it up. They have a stake in that community, in that process. Encouraging positive youth development. That's like at the core of all of these things that we're talking about, is creating those memories for them, building on those positive experiences. And because in our programs, we have them for such a short period of time, one of the things that we want to aim to do is let's show them the great things that they can do with their friends and their family and their community while they're not under the influence of drugs and alcohol, and to create those great memories, like taking them for hikes. We here in New Mexico, we have a mountain very close, and taking these kids for hikes, they were like, I had no idea that right here, 15 minutes away, I could come out here and it's so quiet and it's so peaceful. And so giving them those experiences to show them, look, you can have these great experiences that don't involve drugs and alcohol. And we need to give them the opportunity so that they can make those connections. And then just providing a continuum of quality treatment services, right? I think at the core of a lot of our mission statements is rehabilitating juveniles, right? What does that mean? Helping them become whole again, helping them, and that's a different road for each one of them, right? We do that through treatment. We do that through support and through guidance and supervision, and these guidelines and these kind of like the bumpers at when you're bowling, right? Like these boundaries of how do we help them kind of bounce back and forth so that we can get them on the right trajectory, right? And ways that we can do that is to engage them in the community and let them be involved in these rites of passages, these juvenile memories, right? Like if you look back at a lot of your juvenile times, think of all those memories that like stick to your head, and whether they're good or bad, whether you learned from them or whether they were really significant in friendships or just connecting you to community things or helping you recognize, like Jessica said, about what am I going to do for my career, right? Some of those early jobs maybe don't help us figure out what career we want, but maybe they help us figure out what career we do not want. And that's equally as important. And we can't figure those things out if we have them on house arrest all the time in their house and not let them at least get out and experience some of these things and learn who they are, what they like, what they don't like, and teach them how to do these pro-social things on their own.
I love that. So we know that it's important. We know it's important for kids. We know it's important for programming. So we also know there are a bunch of barriers, right? So let's talk about what some of the barriers are that get in the way for kids. And this is, we're talking about, again, system-involved kids. What kind of barriers exist for them that means they cannot go to prom or that they can't get that job? So if you could go again to slido.com, or if you didn't take a picture of the QR code, you can do that now. All right, so we have one just straight off the bat, a logistical barrier of that transportation. And transportation is, I think, one of those real challenges for our JDTC programs across the country. I see curfew and house arrest coming in. And those can be real barriers to someone going to something like prom, especially if you have a 9 p.m. curfew. That's going to put a real damper on the activities at a big school dance. And here we have some philosophical ones, the stigma of being system involved, which means that people don't want our youth to participate in their activities maybe, or they feel isolated because of it. And some of our kids do lack social skills. Some of them have too many social skills. And it's safety concerns. And I know that, Lindsay, that's one that your court often deals with. And availability, I'm curious about that a little bit, like the availability of jobs and things. I wonder if you wrote availability and wanted to write a little bit more to explain that further, or panelists, if you guys have any idea about what we might be thinking about with availability.
Well, when I saw availability, the first thing that popped into my mind is how many things that we put the youth that are in the programs, like how many things they've got: therapy, they've got community service, they've got all of these things that they are, you know, dictated, you have to do all of these things. And it's like, well, where do you have the time left to do anything else, or even in sometimes the desire? We all recognize what burnout is, and if you're constantly doing something, it leaves very little room or availability in your schedule for you to do anything else. So that's what I saw when I looked at that.
And that ties in with, I think we get the safety concern of, we get nervous if kids have free time. It's like, oh my gosh, if they have free time, they're going to get into mischief. So we have to schedule the heck out of their lives, when that can actually be a barrier or a harm to undermining some of the things that they need to experience with adolescence, and a certain degree of freedom, where they make the choices. They're not all made for them, or they don't do anything. It's okay. It's actually okay to have a little couch potato time, I think. Okay, so yes, this is great that somebody's elaborating on their idea of availability, overbooked. Yeah.
Yeah.
And then the lack of availability of services and jobs willing to take just as involved youth.
Yeah, so I think it's right. It's a multifaceted issue of availability. And then I see that cost came in as well. And that is absolutely an issue. So somebody wants to go to the big concert, or wants to do the travel, wants to go on the school trip, and they can't afford it. And so that's a logistical barrier that has to be addressed. And so now I want to talk a little bit about some solutions to barriers. And I'm going to ask our panelists to kind of think a little bit about this. And so first I want to start with, what barriers do JDTC programs in place to keep kids from doing these things? And so Lindsay, I thought you could talk a little bit about this to start us.
Yeah, I think one of the big barriers, especially with juvenile drug treatment courts, just by the nature of what we do, is the concern that they might relapse, right? That they might use drugs, or that they might be in a dangerous situation, or, you know, our kids might get into additional trouble or pick up new charges, right? Like, I think those are the things that immediately pop in our head, that we're like, I'm not letting that kid go to the county fair, the state fair, because there's going to be drugs there, and there's going to be gang activity. And the best way to make sure that the kid doesn't engage in that is just to not let them go. And that's a perfectly reasonable thought process of what that should look like, right? And so I think we have to change our mindset. Instead of, I think our initial reaction to some of these requests can be like, absolutely not, right? Like, last week you didn't do this, or this week you didn't do this, and so absolutely not, right? And so the kid has to advocate for why we should consider it, versus changing our mind state to say, okay, let's look at this from a positive perspective. Can we do it? Is there any circumstances? Is there any way that we can come up with a plan that will make this work, right? And that's a completely different mindset. And when you look at things from that perspective, then you start breaking down those barriers one at a time to say, hey, what are the benefits of allowing this child to do this? What are the things that they're going to get out of it? And if we look at it really honestly, we're going to see some of those parallels of our mission statements, that these are actually activities. They're going to support our mission statement. So then let's look at why are we concerned about it? And not to say that those concerns aren't valid. There are some valid concerns that we need to make sure that we can, as a team, feel comfortable with allowing the youth to participate in whatever the activity is. And so just sitting down together to say, hey, from everybody's perspective, what are our biggest concerns? And are there ways that we can address those concerns? And if there is, then let's come up with the plan, right? So that, because when we're gone, the kid is going to go to the state fair, and they might get into those troubles because no one ever taught them how to go to the state fair and to avoid the gang activity, and how to turn down the drugs, and how to just go and ride the rides and see the animals, right? And so we can see these as opportunities to teach them how to be in these situations and come out with a positive outcome on the other side. So rather than just say, no, you can't go, and be naive and thinking when we're gone, they're just never going to go, say, okay, is there a way that we can safely have them go and teach them how to safely engage in these activities, how to make the best out of these activities, and to help them have ownership in that, right? And have them help come up with the plan. talk to the youth and say, hey, I'm concerned that if I let you go to the fair, you're going to use drugs. And let the youth talk with you about how they're going to set your mind at ease at that they're not going to, right? Like, what can we put in place as far as a safety plan to make sure that we do feel comfortable with you going, right? I think sometimes we can get in our own way. And my court is no exception to this. We can often get in our own way, and we have to remind ourselves to think about it as a team. Can we make it work? And let's, work together on that situation. And we had a situation like that where we had a client that wanted to go to a concert, and this youth was struggling with fentanyl use. And we were very concerned about, allowing them to go out of town with their family, but still to this concert that was scary for us, right? And so we were able to sit down to say, what are our concerns? And the treatment team was able to chime in and say, hey, we can come up with a safety plan that involves training of Narcan, and that involves having the parents come in, everyone in the family being given Narcan, the whole family training. How can we do check-ins and pictures and check-ins on apps and sending pictures with family members? And so we came up with all these creative ideas so that the team as a whole could say, okay, I think we can do this safely. And we were able to send the kid out, and he was able to come back, and we were able to test, and we were able to do all those things that were important to us, but still allow him this experience with his family. So switching that mindset, is it possible? And if so, what would it take to make it possible?
I think not starting with no is such a great way to start that conversation. It's anything could be possible. So let's think about it as a team. So we don't just go with, no, it's against our rules. Let's be open to allowing that. Right. I want to move us along because we're almost at our time already. This has been such a good discussion. So let's talk about if there are school rules in place. So something like, probation kids can't go to prom. I don't know if that's such a strict rule, but maybe it is. And so what do we do if there are some school barriers? And Martha, what are your thoughts about that?
Right. Well, I thought one of the things that in school, and it's some of what the school presents, and then what the juvenile drug treatment court team presents in terms of barriers as well as addressing barriers. And the schools might have some certain requirements about if youth want to be involved in clubs or sports. But we know these are really great ways for kids to meet other pro-social kids, to learn lessons and experience with teamwork and working on a joint project together that often is going to go beyond just the benefit of the kids involved, but some contribution to the school or to their class, if it's a yearbook thing or a drama club or what have you. And so thinking about it, and also problem solving with school personnel, if there are any requirements about attendance or grades or what have you, that might be barriers for youth to engage in these pro-social activities. We may think that sometimes alternative education or alternative schools are a solution, but often, what happens when school kids are in alternative schools that maybe can adjust to their behavioral needs or their learning needs is those places don't provide opportunities for the social clubs, the proms, the other activities that help kids feel part of being in a group of other, like kids, and doing the fun things that they get to talk about the Monday after the Friday of the going to the homecoming or what have you. And so I would just suggest to team members and your communication through your educational liaison or probation folks who are working most closely and connected most closely with school folks is how are we integrating, including our kids in juvenile drug treatment court in the school social life, in the clubs, in the opportunities. And if and maybe a probation officer needs to be the one that makes the connection with a school counselor around to provide some guidance on, training schools or college or junior college or what have you, that the probation officer needs to be sort of proactive there, because it's just not happening otherwise for the kid in the school to connect with, say, the guidance counselor. So some thoughts like that of how can team members maybe facilitate some of these connections with adults or clubs or social activities and opportunities in high school, and even making that part of, a case plan is what are some normal things for happening for kids in school as their high school experience, and even talking to kids, would you like this to be part of your case plan, and how can we make that happen? So.
Yeah, and I think that this, again, you highlighted the idea that our educational liaisons on our team can help us figure out how to communicate and navigate within the school system, which has its own set of rules and a whole bunch of different language and ways they approach things. And so that is, when we urge teams to work with their school districts, this is one of those reasons why, because so much of what we think of it as typical traditional adolescent stuff happens around the school. And when we take our kids out of that, we really are creating this isolation, and they are missing out on opportunities that other kids do have. So we do want to think about how to make that happen. Okay, and Elijah, I wanted you to talk a little bit about these logistical barriers. So we had people bring up things like cost and even those opportunity barriers of having kids so scheduled. So what do you think we can do about some of the logistical barriers?
Yeah, and so like even things when it comes to like getting a driver's license, they might not have a car, there might not be access to the birth certificate and things like that, or even applying for jobs. We live in a world where it's all done on the internet. Gone are the days where you walk up the street and just collect applications. And so having computer lab rooms where you can do a myriad of things, because you might have kids that need to apply for FAFSA but need someone that's there to help work them through that, or at the same time apply for their jobs online or work on their resumes. A lot of local nonprofits will help fill in the gaps for these. If I know when I was working in a high school, I had to do a lot of the footwork of calling around to see what they might have available, but there are plenty of places that would donate refurbished computers to kids. It was a huge win, because one of the things we found out is like, oh, you're giving them all this work to do online, like just do this online, just do this online. And then you realize that not everyone has a home computer, a laptop. A phone is usually the most prevalent digital device that they're using. And so there's that. And then one of the other things that you can look at is that sometimes schools have extra funds for these things. If kids are interested in school dances or sports or things like that, there are sometimes school funds that are set aside. And depending on what the communication is between the JDTC and the school, and if that's part of the plan and the kids working their program in the way that they should, that's a really good incentive to help get them going. If it's to help the cost of their prom tickets or to make sure that it covers their sports fee or whatever it is. A lot of communication is kind of the way to kind of address a lot of those logistical challenges, because there's usually someone in the room that has a solution. It's just getting that knowledge out there and presenting the problem, because not everyone knows that that's a barrier.
Yeah, I like that idea very much of rather than saying, well, this just can't work, we're going to think about it and we're going to figure out who else we can bring in. And that's where, when we think about our drug courts, we like the idea of those steering committees and those larger connections to your community, because you can access those for things like helping figure out how we pay for the cost of those prom tickets. And it also is an opportunity to work with kids to say, okay, you have a long-term goal. You want to get your driver's license. Let's talk about all the things we need to do first. So you take your long-term goal and you break it up into smaller, shorter term things to have to get done. You have to find your driver's license. You have to find your birth certificate. You have to figure out if somebody will lend you a car so you can practice driving. You have to do all of these other little things before you can get to that bigger goal. And that can be helpful too. But go ahead.
Sorry, no, go ahead.
I was going to say, but I don't think any challenge is insurmountable if we spend our time thinking about how to break it down.
And I think one of the big things in that too is, like, even if this is a work in process, like even if you have all of these logistical barriers, like communicating that to the youth is really important, because it lets them know that you just haven't forgotten about what it is that they're looking for or what they want, and it keeps that trust there. Oftentimes, like, I think as adults, we're like, oh yeah, I'm going to work on it, and then we go and we don't ever circle back to them. And that shows them that even as adults, like we still, when we take on things, we're still held accountable for what it is that we say that we're going to do, which is something that we're trying to get them to also do. So we're modeling that behavior for them in a way that they're like, okay, I can do this. And if you forget, being able to say, oh, you know what, I totally forgot about that. I'm going to write it down and I'm gonna make sure that I get it done, you know, by Wednesday, is again, modeling behavior for them and showing them like, hey, you can make a mistake, take ownership of it, and then still get right back on track.
Oh, I love that point, Elijah. I think that's a great way to think about this, that everything that we're doing is modeling the behavior for young people. All right, so to wrap up, I want to know what everybody who's participating today, what your program is doing. Have you come up with creative ways to help kids get driver's licenses, to help them get jobs, to get them to a prom, to send them on that school trip? So if everybody could share, again, using slido.com, what you're doing to help kids reach their milestones. And this will wrap us up because we're 2 minutes before our time here.
And just while people are typing, I had a thought to throw out there. I know some of these things the teams approach as incentives for youth and rewards, but
Right.
I wonder if instead of having kids have to earn a driver's license, that you reframe it as, wait a minute, this is a normal adolescent milestone. And I want to help a youth feel like they're part of what other kids are doing and what's appropriate. And so instead of maybe framing it as an earned thing, you frame it as a facilitating it happening, that they don't get to earn something by they're not, you know, whatever their behavior is, but that you reframe it as, wait a minute, no. If the kid were in juvenile drug treatment court, their parents and their school teachers would be facilitating them doing certain things. How can we look at our team and our program as doing the same thing? So I'll just throw that out there.
All right, I see we're getting some answers. So we do have a team that's helping financially where they can and providing transportation to interviews and stuff. So that would be great, right? Like you have an interview and you're going and you need somebody to give you a ride so that you're sure you're there on time. That's so nice to have, you know, your probation officer show up to drive you and maybe give you a pep talk ahead of time. And I see we've got GED classes, donations for specific needs. I know some programs do have like a closet that has things like ties and shirts and jackets and high heels and all of those things for kids to check out or borrow for activities.
Yeah, a lot of places have a Dress for Success program or some sort of entity like that they'll help you get ready for all sorts.
I wonder if programs have go the extra mile by offering like haircuts or nail care or skin care for some of the teens, boys and girls, to feel extra special or extra ready. I know that this maybe goes above and beyond, you know, the basics of, say, clothing for a job interview, but an experience with getting a really great haircut or something like that, that helps the youth feel really special and maybe worthy.
I like that. Right. All right. So we are right at our time. So I see last two come in, the mock interviews, the resume workshops, and the job readiness workshops. So it sounds like you guys have some things in place that you're using. If you don't have these particular ideas in place, I encourage other teams to steal from and use these ideas. As we always like to say, no sense reinventing the wheel. I'd like to thank you all for joining us for today's webinar. I hope you found it interesting and insightful, and I hope it inspired you to think a little bit about how your program can say yes when kids ask to do things, rather than starting with the no's or the why it's a bad idea. Start with the, okay, yeah, maybe, let's see how we can make that work. I think that's my favorite takeaway from today. Thanks to our panelists for participating. I really always appreciate listening to you and your insights. And I'm gonna get our evaluation and put that in the chat so folks can respond, tell us how we did today, and we will let you go.